My name is Marcello Di Cintio. I'm a travel writer from Calgary.
An award-winning.
An award, yes.
Award-winning.
I'll let you say
that.
I'll let you do that.
You've written a book about literary pilgrimage to Iran.
Yes, in a way. I got a few years back. I got very interested in two aspects of Persian culture. One is their love of poetry. In Iran, poetry is the greatest of all art forms. Men, women, children, people who've been in school, people who've not, everyone can recite poems from their memories. It's remarkable. And
I guess that's in the school system, they must say.
Not just in the school system.
No.
It's just part of it. It's part of their culture.
Yeah.
And on weekends, like for holidays, Iranian families will pack a picnic, go to the tomb of a poet who's been dead maybe for hundreds of years, and pay their respects, and then sit in these beautiful gardens and read poems to each other.
So really, a whole nation of literary tourists.
Whole nation, absolutely. And the other aspect is wrestling. And I used to be a wrestler in university, and so there's all these traditional folkloric styles of wrestling. So what I did in Iran is I did kind of a dual pilgrimage. I went to the tombs of all the great poets, and I also tried to seek out these old traditional styles of wrestling, and actually participate in it as much as I could.
Wow.
And I found that there's some
with wrestling clubs or universities? Or?
No, most of this stuff was kind of village type wrestling where you do it out in the dirt and all these sorts of things. But I found that there's connections between these two phenomena, which I thought was very interesting. For example, I saw this wrestling happened in one of the desert areas. The wrestlers were there it was at a wedding, and the wrestlers actually compete with each other to entertain the wedding guests. But before they do,
both sides of the family, or
no, actually, it's like just like you'd hire a band or a DJ.
Okay,
they have these guys will come and they compete. And it's not staged.
So entertainment.
It's like entertainment,
but for real.
It's absolutely for real.
Yeah.
And
not
so
WWE.
No. It's a legitimate competition, which is really interesting. And what they would do before they compete is they'd recite poetry. And these epic kind of Iliad or type of poems, right? These epics, right? With warriors and battles, that kind of stuff. So they recite this stuff.
But these at weddings. How ironic, really.
Although someone said to me, what signifies marriage more than a little bit of wrestling and a little bit of poetry? So I suspect it's maybe it's appropriate.
Yeah.
I saw these guys, these old wrestlers, and they're called Pahlevans, like these old champions. A man in his 80s, and I was talking to him
like an old lion.
Yeah, yeah. And he took off his shirt for me, and he showed me that his chest and arms were covered in tattoos of characters from old poems. And so there's this fascinating connection between the two art forms. And even though those kind of traditional styles of wrestling are kind of dying out in Iran, they're still seen with this great honor and dignity. These are the heroes. These are contemporary heroes. The Pahlevans, like the champions, weren't just wrestling champions. They were well-read, and they were good men, and the community leaders, and they're kind of men who would give money to the poor and help old ladies cross the street, right? There was this ideal man.
So a well-rounded
ideal man called a Pahlevan, and that man, the origins of that comes from old poems too. The Shahnameh, the great book of kings that Ferdowsi wrote, this epic poem, which is to Iran what Homer's Iliad would be to the Greeks.
And to Western civilization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That Pahlavan, that idea of the ideal man, comes from that poem. The great Pahlevans, and these were at the time mythical characters, but now these are real men who strive towards this ideal. Again, less and less. There's just like all traditions elsewhere, there seems to be this dying out.
But what a fascinating enterprise!
It was wonderful.
What spurred it?
Well, like I mentioned, I used to be a wrestler,
right?
And so certainly that, and I always knew that.
So you did some research into the.
Yeah, I did some research, and I had heard somewhere about this kind of love of poetry, and the more research I did, I realized that, wow, these two things are very connected. Mm-hmm. It was a great way. It was a great engine to drive a trip.
Right.
In a way, I could follow the Lonely Planet to all the really beautiful mosques, or else I could seek out the tombs of poets and old wrestlers. And I thought that was a much more interesting to me itinerary. Yeah, and the best thing about that is that it brought me far away from kind of the normal trail that foreigners or travelers might go along.
Well, that's what I find with being a literary tourist is, if I want to seek out some bookstores, often they'll take you into all sorts of places where you off the beaten path, or try and connect with an author or a fine press, or so it sounds to me like you connected with some passions of yours.
Right.
You met some fascinating people. What about the language?
I studied Farsi before I left.
Did you? Okay.
And so I was functional. I mean, in Persian before I.
So you took this really seriously.
I took it seriously. It was very exciting to go. It's the first and so far now the only time I've ever traveled and done a big project where I learned the language of the people. I didn't think I'd find enough English in Iran to function, and you know what, I might have been able to be perfectly honest, but having that, it was just an extra door into the culture, and it was just amazing. I would love to be able to do that for every trip.
Yeah,
and Persian is a gorgeous language.
Well, how did you get over there though? Like, were there all sorts of hoops you had to?
No, not really. I mean, this is 2003, 2004, so things were a little bit different. We actually had an embassy in Canada at that time.
In Iran, yeah.
No, in both. Like
an Iranian embassy.
Yeah,
here
the
Harper
government just closed down the Iranian embassy in Ottawa and in Tehran, which is ridiculous. But I remember the first time I went over there, I made the mistake of applying for a journalist visa at the embassy in Ottawa, and I still haven't heard back yet. I think they're still mulling it over.
Right.
10 years later. So what I did instead is I flew to Istanbul and went to the embassy there and applied as a tourist and got my visa in 48 hours. And when I returned the following year and applied for a tourist from Ottawa and got a visa, no problem. It's not hard to travel in Iran or to Iran. Even now.
Yeah.
You know, here in North America, we raise our eyebrows at this, but you know how many package tours of Europeans I saw in Iran? Like, it's not just intrepid backpackers and this kind of stuff. No, it's like retired German family, you know, couples with their walkers coming out of tour buses, and like the traveling is easy.
By that, do you mean the amenities
are beautiful and cheap and impeccably clean. I don't know if I've been in a cleaner place. There's amazing things to see. The food's incredible. I mean, honestly, Iran, it's not a secret because everyone in Europe knows that Iran is a wonderful place to visit. It's only here in North America that we see it as the boogeyman.
Yeah, you read the headlines and it's like these guys are evil. And
the thing is about the Iranians is that the Iranians are incredibly well-read, and they know what goes on around the rest of the world. They're incredibly internet savvy. Mm-hmm. I heard somewhere that Farsi is the third most used language online after English and Mandarin, or one of the major Chinese languages. And so they know that the rest of the world thinks that they're crazy. The rest of the world thinks that they're extremists and fundamentalist. And so when you go, and it doesn't matter if you're Canadian or American or anything else, when you go, they go out of their way to prove those stereotypes wrong. I've never been treated with that level of hospitality anywhere in the world. It was like being in a country of my grandparents.
Wow.
They would argue with each other who would get to take me home to have dinner at their house.
But how did you put yourself in that position?
You just arrive.
You just arrive and start talking to people.
People come and talk to you. It's remarkable, and it's not just my experience. Everyone I met, every other foreigner traveler that I met, had the same experience. We're walking on the street, and people just come up, try to practice their English, invite you to their home, and they would always ask you political questions, right? They say, what do you think of Iran? Which is essentially what they're asking you is, what do you think of the Iranian government?
Yeah.
And they desperately wanted to tell their story. But the level of civility and hospitality and generosity and warmth, I've never experienced that anywhere in my life. And we should all take a lesson from the Persians on what it means to be hospitable to foreigners, to travelers. It's part of their own culture too. I mean, there is an ethic of courtesy that's ingrained in their culture, in their etiquette with each other as well. But it goes over the top with travelers, over the top.
What about some of the tombs then? Were there highlights? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Oh, well,
like, again, it's a big country, so.
Yeah, but the most beautiful. I mean, there's what they have is the poets are buried in these tombs that are surrounded by these gorgeous gardens. So in Shiraz, you have the tomb of the great poet Hafez, and that was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen because I'd gone to this. It's a gorgeous garden with orange trees and just beautiful, beautiful, and you'd watch these young Iranians. And I'm not talking like old ladies who like poems. I'm talking about people in their 20s. They kneel before this marble slab of a poet that had been dead for 600 years. and wept. Like, they would cry openly at the tomb of these poets. Sometimes they would read some of their poetry at the tombstone, like reading back to them. And then they would go and sit, after they paid their respects, they would go sit with their friends or with their family, and they just read poems to each other. And it wasn't just lovers, although there was that. Yeah. It wasn't just old men reading. It was young people who would gather, and that for them was a social activity. This is what we do, is we read poems to each other. And I remember telling them, one guy, I said, in Canada we don't do this. Because if
we watch TV.
We watch TV, and he felt bad for me. He felt sorry that we were so uncultured. And so did I at the time. I watched all that. So that was in Shiraz for the tomb of Hafez, and I visited the tomb of Ferdowsi near Mashhad, and Saadi also in Shiraz. And everywhere you go, there might be a small little tomb or a large garden, but they're everywhere in Iran, and they're worth seeking out.
And what about the English translation? Is there any such thing?
You can find English translations for most of the famous Iranian poets. You can find them there. Sometimes they're iffy. They're full of spelling mistakes and that kind of stuff.
Sure, okay.
If I were to do it again, I would certainly load up with my translations here and take them over. And there's nothing more beautiful than sitting in those gardens and reading Hafez to yourself, even in English or whatever. It was beautiful.
They almost designed the country for literary tourists.
It's remarkable. I mean, you could visit the beautiful mosques, you can visit all the historical stuff, but really, I think going from poet's tomb to poet's tomb is a beautiful way to not just see the country, but to get a sense of the heart of the people.
That's fantastic. Really, thank you for
my pleasure.
Going over there and
everyone
reporting.
I don't say this about any other country. Everyone should go to Iran. I really believe that.